Good afternoon. My name is Neil Lutsky, and I am currently the chair of the steering committee of the APS Fund for Teaching and Public Understanding of Psychological Science. It's my great pleasure to introduce Carol Dweck as this year's APS-David Myers Distinguished Lecturer on the Science and Craft of Teaching Psychological Science. Carol Dweck is the Lewis and Virginia Easton Professor of Psychology at Stanford University. Her work in psychological science, as you know, is eminent and significant. She is the recipient of the inaugural Edan Prize for Education Research, the James McKean Cattell Lifetime Achievement Award from APS, and the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award of the American Psychological Association, among other recognitions. She is an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her 2006 book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, I think it's fair to say, has had a singular and profound effect on educational and popular understanding and behavior. It's also one of Bill Gates's favorite books. There is something deeply appropriate about Carol Dweck's selection for the honor of giving this talk. Like David Myers, Professor Dweck is the epitome of the humanist scientist, committed to the development and use of scientific knowledge for the betterment of the common good. Like David Myers, Professor Dweck is a public intellectual who has stimulated thoughtful and challenging discussions of received beliefs, and in so doing, has raised the aspirations of countless individuals. And like David Myers, Professor Dweck is both a dedicated teacher and teacher of teachers. Please join me in welcoming Carol Dweck to the podium and in thanking her for her contributions to our profession and for providing us with this opportunity to hear her address Mindsets, the Science and Craft of Teaching.
I always like to start with my favorite slide. A couple of summers ago, a colleague sent me a photo of her nephew who had turned on a computer for the first time. And it struck me, that's what we're all like. We were all once that excited about learning something new. And yet, just a few years later, we see kids being overwhelmed and anxious. And in college, this has risen, the overwhelmment, the anxiety, the depression, has risen to new heights. This study published not long ago of college students experiencing overwhelming anxiety, experience depression such that it is difficult to function. On the left of each panel, you have within the last 2 weeks. On the right, you have sometime in the last year. An alarming proportion of our students are experiencing overwhelming anxiety and depression that impairs their functioning. A quick look on the internet will show you some very interesting solutions to this problem. For example, college students, sometimes you get overwhelmed with schoolwork from research essays, coursework, reports to research projects. We'll write them from scratch at fair prices. Fortunately, mindset science provides an alternative to this. And our research on mindsets, we hope, makes a contribution to how we can get students back on track, enjoying learning. In our work, we've identified 2 mindsets that students can hold about their intellectual abilities. When students are in a fixed mindset, they believe those abilities are just fixed traits. You have a certain amount, and that's it. But when they're in a growth mindset, they believe those intellectual abilities can be developed through hard work, but not just hard work. Also through learning good strategies and through lots of support, help, teaching, mentorship from others. Now, no one's a pure fixed or growth mindset, and we're all a mixture, and we'll come back to that later. Here's an overview of what I want to talk about today. First, I'll tell you a little bit more about the mindsets and how they work. Then I'll tell you about the science, the effect students' mindsets have on their achievement, the latest intervention we've done to teach students more of a growth mindset. Fascinating work by others on how a whole field can have a mindset and what that impact is. And then some brand new work by Mary Murphy and her group on STEM professors' mindsets and their impact. Then I'll segue into my own craft of teaching, how I imbue growth mindset in my own undergraduates, and all of this in the context of using those growth mindsets to make your contribution, not just for personal growth in the abstract, but to fuel and direct their contribution. So here we go. How do mindsets work? The fixed and growth mindsets create a whole psychological world with very different meanings. So when students are in more of a fixed mindset, they have the goal of looking smart and not looking dumb, because that fixed amount is measurable through your performance. They tend to think if you have to work hard at something, it means you're not good at it. They tend to think that setbacks certainly mean they're not good at something. As a result, they may shy away from challenges, not persist well in the face of obstacles, and ultimately show impaired learning or achievement. But in a growth mindset, you're not fearful about your abilities all the time. You're able to adopt goals oriented more toward learning. You're more likely to see effort not as something that's undermining, but as something that impels your learning. Setbacks, not always pleasant, but often informative. This view then encourages students to take on challenges, to persist in the face of setbacks, ultimately leading to greater learning. Especially in the face of challenge. One of my favorite studies is by Mosher, Schroeder, and their colleagues. Brought college students into a lab, hooked them up to an EEG machine that measured from the parts of the brain that indicate an individual is deeply processing errors. Gave them a task on which they made errors, and look at what happened. When you look at the students who were more in a growth mindset on the right of the screen, you'll see that those parts of the brain are on fire. They're deeply processing the error, and they're actually correcting it, more likely to correct it on the next trial. And the fixed students who are in more of a fixed mindset, they're noticing the error, and they're turning away from it as quickly as possible. Very little is going on in terms of deep processing. And as a result, they are robbed of the knowledge they could have obtained from that. So let's look at some of our interventions that look at the effect of teaching a growth mindset on students' achievement. The early interventions were multi-session, in-person interventions, treatments, growth mindset treatments. Later on, we started sending them out over the internet to see if we could scale up successfully. These later studies show that with college students, we could increase the rate of underrepresented groups carrying a full load in college, which would lead them on the path to graduation. But most recently, my former student, David Yeager, who's now an associate professor at the University of Texas, Austin, had a wacky idea. What if we could take the highest quality growth mindset intervention, distill it into 2 25-minute sessions, send it out over the internet to a nationally representative sample of students making that difficult transition to high school, and what if we could impact their grades and STEM course taking? Now, how likely is that? It turns out that most of the expensive, extensive, time-consuming interventions to raise adolescent achievement fail. Most of them get zero effect, even ones that showed promising results in earlier trials. So it was pretty wacky, but thus was born the National Study of Learning Mindsets. David hired a research firm that obtained a nationally representative sample. We had pre-registered hypotheses and analyses. 3 research firms not only constructed the sample, but administered the intervention, oversaw the data collection and data processing. So really arm's length. We could not affect the data in any way. And after the analyses, the data were further analyzed and confirmed by a team of Bayesian statisticians who did an independent blinded analysis. What did we find? First, those enhanced growth mindsets made a difference. Lower achieving students, and that was the pre-registered hypothesis, lower achieving students showed a significant gain in grade point average over their first year of high school. Lower and higher achieving students showed a significant increase in advanced math course taking the year after the growth mindset treatment. We also found out what made a growth mindset treatment take root and endure. We found that student norms, the degree to which your peers engaged in challenge seeking and valued learning new things and hard things, made a big difference. When the peers were negative about taking on challenges, the growth mindset treatment did not take hold. The manipulation check worked, but it didn't take root and bear fruit in the real world. But as the norms got stronger to support challenge seeking, the effects got much stronger. Teachers' mindsets made a difference. The more teachers themselves had a growth mindset, the more the intervention changed grades. Teachers, even though students were randomly assigned to treatment and control within classrooms, the teachers presumably were able to respond and support the students who are now working harder or taking on more challenges. Also, the teachers who had more of a growth mindset showed a smaller gap between underrepresented minorities and other students. How do our results compare to the expensive, intensive studies that do work? We get about half for overall GPA for lower achieving students. We get about half of the best programs, the most successful programs, their impact on long-term grades. So we're really excited about this. And there's lots more we hope to learn from these data. But mindset isn't just something inside a student's head that they cart around with them. Mindset contexts matter. What mindset is a context conveying to a student? Now, a few years back, Leslie Simpian and their colleagues wondered whether a whole field could embody a fixed or growth mindset. They polled scholars in 30 different academic disciplines and asked them the extent to which they and members of their field believed that success in their field was just a function of brilliance that could not be taught. You kind of have it or you don't. And the extent to which their field believed that success in the field was a matter of dedication, hard work, learning over time, and so forth. Now, every field endorsed a mixture. No one said it was all one or all the other. But the extent to which a field endorsed that fixed view, success depended on brilliance that just couldn't be taught, made a difference. It says here my battery is running low. Should I be concerned? Yes, because my slide is not advancing, I'm concerned. I must not have said my PowerPoint prayer beforehand. We were just talking about it, Neil and I, before. Okay, but before I reveal the data, I'd like to show you, here's female representation in STEM subjects. But, and that doesn't surprise you that as STEM subjects get STEMmier, the female representation goes down. But it might surprise you that there's such a distribution for non-STEM subjects, ranging from art history and psychology, who have lots of women PhDs, to economics, philosophy, and music composition. So what did Leslie Simpian and their colleagues find? They found a strong correlation in the 0.6s between the mindset a field had and the number of women earning PhDs in those fields. As that fixed mindset went up, the number of women in the field went down, and the same pattern was found for the non-STEM subjects. Recently, Mary Murphy and her students recognized that, yeah, some STEMs are STEMmier than others, but what about Within field variation, what about the professors themselves? What are they believing and what are they conveying in the classroom? So, in this study, recently published in Science Advances, they studied 150 STEM professors. And they had, in addition to their current classes, they had data from 15,000 students, many of whom were in past classes of these professors. And they assessed the professors' mindsets. Some of them had strong fixed mindsets. You kind of have it or you don't. And they said, so the researchers sat in their classes the first days of class and when exams were being given back. And they said things like, if it isn't easy for you, you don't belong here. Well, these were intro classes. They're freshmen often from all different kinds of backgrounds, different degrees of preparation. And they're sitting there thinking, if it isn't easy, I don't belong here. They do the first assignment, it isn't easy. What happens? Another one said, I don't want any stupid questions. If you have a stupid question, don't ask it. Obviously, no one ever asked a question. Recently, I heard about a professor, not a professor, a high school chemistry teacher in the Stanford area who said to his class, I learned this because one of my colleagues has a daughter in this class, said to the class, within a week, I know who will get an A and who will get a C. Further, he said, I will know the difference between a real A and a fake A. A fake A is one that you had to work for. Look at what happened. On the left, you have the STEM course grade for the fixed mindset professors, and you see quite a large achievement gap. The white Asian students are on the left, and the underrepresented minority students are on the right. To the right of that, you have the growth mindset professors. Everyone did better, and the achievement gap was reduced. They further asked the current students, they surveyed them and asked such things as, how much did your instructor motivate you to do your best work? How much did the instructor emphasize learning and development? The answers to these two questions mediated the effect I just told you about. And by the way, check out the rightmost bars. The classes of the growth mindset professors were not easier or requiring of less work. How do we create these growth mindset environments? This is something that is very much under study now, and we don't have all the answers, but there's, so ongoing research, Mary Murphy, Stephanie Freiberg, David Yeager, Andre Simpian, Kyla Heimowitz, C.Y. Chu in Hong Kong, all ACE researchers, all dedicated to understanding how educators convey these mindsets. And Eva Pomeranz here, how parents convey these mindsets. But we do know this emphasis on growth, on learning improvement, rewarding improvement is at the basis. Providing resources for growth, expectation of growth, and such practices as opportunities to revise work. But now I'm going to tell you about the craft that I have developed in teaching my freshman course. Every fall at Stanford, I teach a group of freshmen. It's a seminar. It's part of the Stanford Freshman Seminar Series, and every fall I get a set of brand new students. They're excited. They're also terrified. It's just palpable. And what do I say to them on the first day? I say, today, you're quitting your old job and you're starting your new job. Your old job was getting as many A's as possible and acing all the achievement tests in order to get into college. And A's are good. I wish you well with the A's, but that's not your job anymore. Your job is to use the amazing resources of this university to become the person you want to be, the person who will make your contribution to the world. And the whole rest of the course, well, there are lots of readings of articles and critiquing and this and that, and they design their own research project. But the rest of the course is helping them develop a growth mindset and think through how they could put it in the service of their contribution, how they can become the person they want to be, the person who will make their unique contribution to the world. You can see that they're initially very relieved. It's not about being the smartest person, but as it takes root, they see it's not as easy as it seems. They need a lot of scaffolding there. I give a weekly paper in which they write about the topic I assign. Now, I used to, when I first started teaching this course, I've taught it for 14 years. I used to say, no, write to me about your mindset, blah, blah. And amazingly, all of them wrote about, or most of them, about their growth mindset. I felt like that's not plausible, but based on insights from a colleague in Australia, Susan Mackey, we now understand how deeply we are all a mixture. Even if we generally endorse more of a growth mindset, we all have things that trigger us into a fixed mindset, whether it's struggling on something and not making the progress one had hoped, whether it's having a setback in a valuable area, whether it's confronting someone who's a lot better than you when you fancy that you are really great at something. All of these things can trigger students, or us, into more of a fixed mindset. And when I ask them to identify their triggers, whoa, they know exactly what I mean, and they write extensively about their many triggers. But the second part of the fixed mindset, this assignment, is have a conversation with your fixed mindset persona. Your fixed mindset persona is the person who shows up when you're confronted with a challenge. Oh, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you'll make mistakes. Maybe you won't be as good as the other people. You can back off. No one will know. It's a big risk to get in there. And what if you then take the risk and you stumble at first? Whoa, the persona comes back. I warned you, it's still not too late to get out. So, students then talk back. First of all, They name the persona. And I asked them to give the persona a meaningful name, and they choose a very critical relative, sometimes a parent, someone who's judgmental, a former teacher or coach who was very judgmental, even positively judgmental or negatively judgmental. They could choose a character in a book. One of them, students recently gave the fixed mindset persona his middle name, because it's me, but it's not me, he said. One of them named it for a Seth Rogen character, a kind of screw up that he didn't want to be. So the conversation they have with their persona is not one where they banish it or insult it, but one where they persuade it to come on board with them, to try this challenge, to persist in the face of obstacles. And throughout the term, we talk about how they're working with their persona. The next assignment is to do something outrageously growth mindset. Something they'd never consider doing. But not something dangerous or foolhardy, something the person they would love to be would do. And they do outrageous things. Some of them say, well, you might not think this is outrageous, but it's outrageous for me. I'm happy. For example, a couple of years ago, one young man, and again, this is all in the service of the person they want to be and the contribution they want to make. One young man really aspired to eventually become a leader in the medical world and make his contribution, but he was unbelievably shy. Stanford is all about joining clubs and networking, this and that, and yet he was sitting alone in his dorm room. Everything was passing him by. For his assignment, he decided to run for president of his dorm. The night came for the campaign speeches. He awaited his turn, and he thought repeatedly, I could sit down, nobody would know, but then what would I write for my assignment? He got up, he gave his speech, he won. He won the election. He went on to become the leader, the social and more than that leader of his dorm. Emboldened, he then tried out for a school play and got a part. He tried out for a salsa group that salsa'd all over the Bay Area. He didn't make it. He tried again for 2 years until he made it. And I'm excited to say that his saga was written up in the New York Times because people were so impressed with how he went from kind of this shy loner and blossomed in this incredible way. Another student in the same class wanted to make her contribution through journalism. She had been the editor of her high school newspaper. So she applied to the Stanford Daily, and Stanford has this thing called the rollout. People come and bang on your door early in the morning, really early in the morning, and they yell, Stanford Daily, or whatever it is. So they came early in the morning, they banged on the door, and they yelled Stanford Daily. But it was for her roommate, not for her. And she was devastated because she had virtually written her roommate's essay of application. But for her assignment, she wrote back to the Stanford Daily and asked if they had any other kinds of positions, no matter what. She wanted to be part of that group. And so she said she sat there all night with her finger hovering over the send, afraid to humiliate herself or grovel for a position. But she did send it, and they invited her to join the paper. Again, not everything works out. Not every outrageous act is successful, but they all say they do it again, and they will keep doing it. They often say it's exhilarating to try that challenge, and also the worst case scenario where it didn't happen was not as bad as they imagined. I have more of those, but I want to move on. I have them in our growth mindset online interventions. We ask students to mentor next year's a ninth grade student from next year who's struggling, to mentor him or her in terms of growth mindset principles that they're learning. And those letters are amazing. In my class, I adapt that, and I ask them to, I give them plenty of notice because I want them to choose a juicy target. So they spend a week kind of listening carefully to what people in their dorm or in the classes are saying. They choose a really prime target who seems to them to embody a fixed mindset. And then at the appointed hour, their appointed hour, they swoop down. Their techniques are amazing. I'm more like a bull in a china shop, but they are so subtle and interesting. So they just start a casual conversation. Oh, you know, I'm just learning about how the brain changes and neural connections strengthen when you work on something challenging and you stick to it. I never knew that, did you? And then a whole conversation starts about how the brain changes and your intellectual skills can grow. Or they'll say, I just read this article in this class that I'm taking, and I'd love you to read it, and we can discuss it. And so very subtle, very interesting. Sometimes the victim is a parent or a sibling that they think is really being held back by thinking of themselves in limiting ways. I'm not this kind of person or that kind of person. So it's really intriguing to see how they change someone else's mindset, and also how in the process they are reinforcing their own growth mindset. The fourth assignment is I ask them to project themselves 20 years into the future and write me a letter. The letters are wonderful. Dear Professor Dweck, how are you? Are you still teaching this course? I'm not so sure. Probably. But I say I want to hear about the struggles and setbacks you've had on your way to your contribution. And I want to hear where you are now, like 20 years in the future. And the remarkable thing is that, well, first I want them to understand there will be struggles, there will be setbacks. And that's just normal. And so, yeah, they do that. The most remarkable thing is that they go through professions and reject them. It's like, okay, I tried finance, but that wasn't rewarding, so now they don't have to try finance. They can go right to the place where they think their contribution will be most rewarding for them and most valuable for the world. A remarkable number of times, they're kind of in a funk, in a big setback, and they notice lying there somewhere a dusty copy of Mindset. They pick it up, they remember the course, they remember the persona, and they move forward. I also, for their, one of their later assignments, I asked them, what is the most important thing you learned in this course? And it's really edifying because sometimes I didn't even realize I taught something. Well, there was one article where one of the dependent measures was upward social comparison. Whoa, they really latch onto that now because they torture themselves all the time with upward social comparison, meaning that they come out often on the short end of, there's always going to be someone better than you, so what? You need that set of skills, that's why you're taking the course. But another thing they also come up with is this idea of reorienting toward contribution rather than being on the same treadmill they were on in high school. And they are taking more challenging courses, sticking to challenging courses, trying majors they dream of that they might not have had the guts to pursue before. I want to also tell you about the class discussions we have. A lot of it is about the readings, but also every few weeks I go around the room and I ask, what are you struggling with? And every student says what they're struggling with. The other students are astounded that everyone is struggling with something. They thought they were the only ones. And I thought initially when I started this exercise that I would jump in with my sage advice, my years of accumulated wisdom. But no, they jump in for each other. Someone's struggling with computer science. Another student says, that's a really hard course. We have a study group and where we've really been successful in helping each other. And you're welcome to come. Over and over, they address each other's issues. One of the students at the end of the course wrote to me and said, I don't think very much of myself, but I think everyone else in the course is super cool. And if they're struggling too, maybe I'm okay. Also, I came to ask myself, whose discussion is this? Even though I've taught this for 14 years, before every class, I prepare extensively. I reread everything. I create new discussion questions. But in the last year, something new happened. Well, I go around the room and everybody, if they care to, shares what they wrote in their weekly paper, very briefly. And in past years, everyone took a couple of minutes. We went around, and then we went to my planned discussion. But this year, the students really went into their papers in great detail. And I would say things like moving right along, because they took up all but each meeting is an hour and 20 minutes, and they take up an hour and 10 minutes. And I thought, I'm not teaching. They're not learning. But then as I had individual student meetings with students, I asked, is it too much? What's happening? And we're taking up the whole class. Are you missing the discussion on the chapter we read for today? And they all said, no, they were learning an incredible amount by listening to each other. And eventually I talked to all of them, and almost every single one said they were just mesmerized, riveted by what their fellow students were saying about themselves, their lives, their personas, their envisioned future contribution. And I realized it's their discussion, not mine, that makes the big difference. I want to end with the idea that human potential, which I used to think of as just personal growth, is not just personal growth, it's also contribution. And Jenny Crocker pointed out contribution goals some years ago, and I'm fully on board with that now. And I like the word contribution, not just passion or purpose. Passion and purpose are very inward. They're very me-focused. Contribution is we-focused. I'm part of a world, and I want to contribute to it. Just for fun, I Googled human potential, and what did I find? And these were many of the first things that came up. Some lone creature climbing the stairway. What is he going to do when he gets to the smoking podium? I don't know. This individual standing on the top of a tiny something, peak. What are they going to do there? I guess that's one thing. What comes next? How is that human potential? A lone individual getting to the top and glorying in themselves. Instead, we want to see personal growth in the service of contribution, coming together to pursue common goals. That is human potential, and that's what we're trying for in our teaching, to stoke the growth of human potential, contribution, and common goals. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.